The royal family has announced some upsetting news, and it's left Queen Elizabeth heartbroken. In 2017, Queen Elizabeth reached an impressive 91 years of age. What's more, she's the longest reigning monarch of all time, having outlasted even her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria. And as would be expected, she's seen a lot of tragedy throughout her long life. Not only has she lived through wars and disasters, for instance, but she's also experienced a great deal of personal loss. She's outlived her sister, her mother, her one-time daughter-in-law, Princess Diana, and a lot of her beloved pets. Now her time has come, it seems, to consider what will happen after she, too, passes away. The Queen is, of course, very different from your average elderly lady. She commands an amount of wealth, privilege, and power that's unfathomable to most ordinary people. And when she dies, this power will pass to her eldest son, Prince Charles. He in turn will pass his inheritance to the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. It's an age-old system that will most likely last for a good many years to come. And it's likely partly because of this system that the Queen keeps her thoughts and opinions and her likes and dislikes very firmly to herself. Although details leak out from the palace every so often, apparently Her Majesty owns an iPod and enjoys Nintendo Wii games, no one except her family members and her staff know what she's really like. However, the world is aware of one very important aspect of her character. Yes, everyone knows that the Queen adores corgis, and all sorts of royal family merchandise is adorned with the cute little animals. Indeed, you could buy your own cuddly corgis at the official Buckingham Palace gift shop. And when the Queen made a very rare comedic appearance in a skit for the 2012 Olympics, accompanied by actor Daniel Craig, 3 corgis, Willow, Monty, and Holly, were also given starring roles. In fact, it's a rare occasion if pop culture portrayals of the Queen don't include the corgis. They've shown up, played by duplicate doggies obviously, in films as diverse as apocalypse blockbuster 2012, spy comedy Johnny English, and the BFG. And they appear, of course, in the 2006 Oscar-winning biopic, The Queen. Fans of the royal family, too, have had tremendous fun looking out for and identifying the corgis over many years. Many of the dogs, for instance, have made appearances in magazines, and they've had a fun variety of silly names that royal watchers love. Among the names the Queen has chosen for her pups are Sugar, Tiny, Brush, and even Candy. Interestingly, the Queen's relationship with her precious dogs has lasted even longer than that with her husband. In 1933, in fact, Her Majesty was still a little girl, no doubt unaware of what the future had in store, when her parents bought a corgi named Dookie. Young Elizabeth quickly fell in love with the dog, and a decade later she got one of her own, a Pembroke corgi called Susan. Susan was to follow her wherever she went, even on her honeymoon. However, Susan was a bit of a troublemaker. During her time at Buckingham Palace, for instance, she bit 4 people, including a policeman. But she also became the matriarch of a vast dynasty of puppies, including some who were crossbred to make Dorgies, a Dachshund Corgi cross. So when Susan died in 1959, the Queen designed the gravestone for her beloved pet herself. The memorial read, "Susan died 26 January 1959, for almost 15 years the faithful companion of the Queen." Of course, Queen Elizabeth isn't the only monarch who's dearly loved her pets. Queen Victoria had several, in fact, her favorite being a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel named Dash. She fell in love with her husband, Prince Albert, only after noting that he treated her dog well. And when Dash eventually died, she had a grand marble tombstone built for him at Windsor Home Park. However, although Queen Victoria passed a love of dogs onto her descendants, Queen Elizabeth ended up as the only person in her immediate family who adored corgis quite as much as she did. Even her son Charles, it seems, has a pretty indifferent attitude toward them. Indeed, during a 2012 interview with the BBC, he couldn't recognize Susan for certain when he was played a video of the dog. It was unfortunate then that it was around this time the Queen's dogs gradually started dying out. Even the most beloved and pampered corgis only lived to around 15 after all, and by 2015 only Holly and Willow were left. The 2 dogs, sisters born in 2003, had lived the sort of luxurious lives most dogs would only dream of. Every day, for example, they were walked around Buckingham Palace grounds by the Queen, and every night they had fresh steak delivered to them by a servant. So it was heartbreaking when in 2015 one of the Queen's closest advisors in all matters canine related did an interview with Vanity Fair. In it, he announced that there would be no more royal canine puppies. Monty Roberts, whom the Queen's dog Monty was named after, said the Queen wouldn't be breeding dogs anymore. She didn't want to leave any young dog behind. She wanted to put an end to it, he said. I have no right to try and force her into continuing to bring on puppies if she doesn't want to. That isn't my right, but it still concerns me, Roberts continued, because I want her to believe in her existence until she's no longer there, because she's just too important to the world to contemplate checking out. He then said something that an awful lot of elderly Brits probably still believe in too. He said, "For me, the Queen can't die." Then in October 2016, some bad news came out of the palace. Holly, the second last of the Queen's corgis, had died at the age of 13. She developed an illness, according to People magazine, and was put to sleep. Although the dog had had a good life, the fact didn't seem to lessen the Queen's heartbreak. She had Holly buried in Balmoral Castle in a garden she could see from her windows. Buckingham Palace called Holly's death a private matter, as is customary, but an unnamed source reported from inside the palace gave a brief interview to British tabloid The Daily Mail. The Queen was deeply upset, but she doesn't like seeing her dogs suffer, they said. Holly had reached a very good age. She gets more unsettled if they're distressed, and she knows that putting a dog down is often the kindest solution. She was devoted to Holly, and wherever the Queen was, the dog was never far behind, the source said. The Queen, who's owned over 30 corgi dogs throughout her life, now has just one left, Willow. She also has two of the Dachshund corgi crosses, Candy and Vulcan, still with her. Everyone assumed, as likely did Elizabeth II herself, that when those dogs pass away there would be no more. But as any dog owner knows, it's very hard to resist an opportunity to adopt a new dog, no matter how old you are. And in January 2017, some more dog-related news came out of the royal media channels. Unfortunately, it involved yet another death of someone close to the Queen. This time it was her friend, Bill Fenwick, a former gamekeeper at the palace. The Queen very much liked Fenwick and his wife Nancy, even giving them a gift of one of her own corgis at one point. She loved their two dogs too, frequently taking them on walks, even though she could almost certainly have had someone else do it for her. So after their owners passed away, the Queen apparently wondered if she might be the right person to take on the Bichon Frise and corgi. In January 2017, an anonymous insider told The Telegraph the Queen was very fond of Nancy and Bill, and they'd become close friends. Bill was not in the best of health and was unable to exercise the dogs much. So most Sundays after lunch, the Queen would visit him and take the pair out in the park. She was very upset to hear about Bill's death, and she's considering taking the dogs if his family can't look after them. Chances are that whatever happens with the two dogs, it will happen behind closed doors. But perhaps the Queen, like many animal lovers, can't resist the desire to have her favorite kind of dogs around her in her old age. Although her concern about what will happen to her dogs once she dies is noble, she probably doesn't have to worry too much. There's bound to be no shortage of people happy to look after doggy royalty.